Hello and welcome back to the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 29 and it'll be the final week that I'm with my co-host Tyler Brooks before Leah returns next week. And today we're going to be talking about vitamin C. So we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive on everything vitamin C related and how it can be beneficial and everything like that. I wouldn't say I really know more about vitamin C than the average dietitian, but I would say Tyler knows more about vitamin C than the average dietitian. So it's going to be mostly me just asking questions and following my interests basically, and Tyler talking. So what did you want to start off with? Like, what's an interesting thing about vitamin C? Where are we starting with?
Ooh, first of all, I'd say just a random interesting fact first up. Humans and some primates are one of the only animals that can't make their own vitamin C. Most animals can make their own vitamin C, like your dog can make its own vitamin C. Humans can't do that. We have to get it from diet.
Do you know why that's the thing?
I did a little bit of read into it. I think it was just some random branch of evolution way back in the day.
Yeah.
There's a few other random species that can't make their own vitamin C, but most can. Humans are, one of the few that can't, and whatever branch of evolution it was back in the day.
Yeah.
We've evolved past that, I think. Well, I would assume mostly because we do get it through diet pretty easily or pretty comfortably in most circumstances. So probably has something to do with it.
Yeah, so we get it through diet pretty easily. As you said, we don't make it. How long does it stay in our system after we eat it?
Sure. So vitamin C usually sticks around in the system for about 24 hours. It's something we kind of need a relatively consistent intake of. So, for example, if you were to supplement a dose or consume a dose through food, it will elevate the amount of vitamin C in your blood for, about 24 hours before we see it return back to baseline levels.
Yeah, for sure. So, then looking at it in terms of, any applications, I suppose we need to keep that in mind, in terms of, this is jumping straight into the weeds, hey, but, something that I find interesting is, the whole topic of vitamin C and exercise and stuff like that.
Sure.
Do we want to go there first, or do we want to go? Let's go background stuff first. Let's come back to that. Let's go through background stuff. What is important background stuff we need to know?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of important context before we jump straight to that. Largely around things like dosing and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I guess so. Backing up a little bit. First of all, you'd probably think of vitamin C most commonly as something you'd use if you get sick to help with immune function and those sorts of things. That comes from this idea that some of the immune cells, neutrophils, for example, that help fight bacteria and virus and infection and that sort of stuff, use a higher percentage of vitamin C compared to a lot of other cells in the body. These immune cells have even more vitamin C to work with. So if you have more of those resources to help fight the, whatever pathogen or bacteria you're fighting off, you're potentially going to be able to do it more effectively.
So I've heard a common line, so most people take it, I'd assume, to prevent and aid recovery from sickness. Mm-hmm. I've heard a common line from a lot of people in the nutrition world saying stuff like, it doesn't seem to prevent the frequency of getting sick, but it does seem to help speed up recovery. And a common line that's chucked out there is by about half a day on average. Reading through a lot of the stuff you've kind of written down in the notes and prep for this podcast, it's obviously a lot more complex than that, but expanding on that kind of topic.
So in terms of potentially reducing the duration of cold symptoms, the research is pretty mixed on this if you look at the overall amount of research. Some find a meaningful benefit, some don't, some are kind of inconsistent, and we'll get into a few problems with why this might be in a minute. But overall, if you do dose to the right amount, there's some pretty good results with, up to a 25% reduction potentially in cold and flu duration. Now, a lot of that research comes from people who were taking it in advance, so prophylactically, so taking vitamin C daily, and then taking more vitamin C at the onset of cold and flu symptoms. And they had a pretty good benefit, or they showed potential benefit beyond just regular vitamin C supplementation when the cold starts. So there might be additional benefit in making sure you have a good amount leading up to that. Then when you do get those cold and flu symptoms, taking more again. And this could come back to, just strengthening those immune cells and some of those active processes that are using up vitamin C in fighting off the cold and flu. And I think, if you're looking at anywhere from, even a 10% reduction in cold and flu symptoms or duration, that's pretty meaningful. All you want to do when you're sick is get better.
Yeah.
When you have a cold or a flu, man flu, even in extreme cases. All you want to do is get better. So if you can, say your cold goes for 4 days and you get a 25% reduction, you're potentially sick for significantly less time than you would be otherwise. I'd say that's probably worthwhile. And there's an even more sort of, I guess, there's a slightly higher magnitude of effect in children as well. So this could come down to parents. Like if you want your kid to get better faster, pump some vitamin C into them potentially, and it could have that positive benefit of those, like your kids getting better quicker.
Yeah, and like out of interest, are there any other like groups? Like I think I saw somewhere in there about athletes and stuff like that. Does it have more of a role in terms of athletes from that perspective?
Yeah, so in terms of like preventing the cold and flu, in general population, it doesn't seem to prevent it. Doesn't seem to prevent you getting sick much. In athlete population, it does. So there was roughly a 50% reduction of incidence of cold and flu in endurance athletes, for example, who were supplementing with vitamin C. We'll touch on a little bit of how it kind of affects exercise a little bit later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's potentially more of a role that it plays with those higher level athletes or people exercising at a higher level than, say, the average person.
Yeah, super interesting for sure. And like even something that like we've kind of spoken a little bit, but like probiotics and stuff like that, that same kind of thinking, like when they're in overreaching phases, particularly endurance athletes as well, like they're so much more likely to get sick. And that seems to affect long-term progress over long phases. Like there are some statistics out there, I think it's from like Olympics, like their data just tracking and being like, how much is this affecting people's training blocks? How much is this affecting performance in actual events and stuff like that? And it's like, if you get sick less frequently, your performance will actually be better eventually because of it.
Yeah, for sure. Say you miss, I don't know, a week of training through being sick.
Yeah.
And then you're training at 60, 70% capacity the next week because you're still recovering a little bit, not 100% yet.
Yeah.
That's 2 weeks out of your calendar year. If that happens, 5 times that year, you're losing 10 weeks a year of training. Like that's a whole training block in some exercise programs. So that's going to potentially have an effect if you're looking at a long-term phase, like a yearly competition or a 4-yearly competition. 4 years, 10 weeks a year, you're missing 40 weeks of training potentially through being sick. If you can reduce or prevent that, that's going to be meaningful.
Yeah, and even just the random sports, like it just breaks the rhythm. Like when training is going well and then you just break that rhythm, like, it's a big difference. What I guess I really want to talk about is, I guess, dosing. So like, let's start with gold standard. What is the typical dosages? Let's start there and then go a little bit more advanced from there. So like recommended daily intakes, those kind of things.
Sure. So the recommended daily intake in Australia is about 45 milligrams per day of vitamin C for men or women. That's for adults. So inside of that, individual needs are going to vary pretty significantly. So one of vitamin C's main, I guess, roles in the body is to help prevent oxidation or help, reduce inflammation. So we have these compounds in the body called reactive oxygen species. These are things that are basically unstable molecules. Vitamin C can help stabilize them by donating one of its chemical groups. So vitamin C basically helps reduce how much of these inflammatory compounds are floating around the body, essentially. So based on your lifestyle, you will have more or less inflammation compared to somebody else. So for example, smoking increases the amount of inflammation you have in your body. Alcohol intake will increase that. Exercise will even increase that to some degree. So there are various natural and unnatural sources of inflammation. So vitamin C has a role in combating these and the effects they have on overall inflammation in the body. So if you have more inflammation, potentially need more vitamin C. Now the RDI is set at 45 milligrams per kilogram, 45 milligrams per day to prevent deficiency. So that's what the RDIs are there for. So recommended daily intakes are done to prevent deficiency at a population level. They're not there to optimize health and performance. So is it optimal to just be getting in the RDI, which you can probably do through fruits and vegetables? Probably not if you have enhanced needs or exercising a high level or various lifestyle factors that are contributing.
Let's add some context there. So 2 things I want to consider. So one of them is like easy to get through fruits and vegetables. Like let's put context around it. Like how easy is it? Like let's go through some foods. Like how much in an orange? Like I think it's about 80. I don't want to get this wrong. Maybe I'll Google this. Yeah. It's like 80 milligrams or something like that.
I know that you can get typically the average sort of millimolar level of vitamin C in the blood is somewhere between 70 to 85, I think, on average, if you've got a diet rich in vegetables and fruits and those sorts of things. So that will sit your plasma level at around 70 to 85 millimoles. And we'll add some more context to that in a little bit when it comes to supplementation.
So an orange, just cutting in, so an orange is 70 milligrams on average. Obviously, it depends on the size, so close enough. And like people, whenever I say that fact, they're like, "Oh, well, a capsicum's got more than an orange." They're like, it's got double the amount or something. Like it is like if the RDI is 45 milligrams and one orange has 70, it is pretty comfortable to get through foods, basically.
You'd think that, but I know you're a fan of this. How many people get their recommended servings of fruits and vegetables per day?
Low.
It's
like the combination's like less than 6%, right?
So even if you are getting that from one source, there is probably a fair few people that aren't even getting to that. So again, the RDI is just to prevent deficiency. So again, you can have an orange and it's going to prevent you getting scurvy or getting deficiency of vitamin C. But again, that's potentially a fair margin away from what might be the optimal amount of vitamin C.
Yeah. I've got another thought that I've always considered, and I think we've spoken about it, like the whole scurvy thing. Say somebody goes carnivore.
Yes.
Why don't they get scurvy?
There are very small amounts in certain meats of vitamin C. So you will get some in tissues. There's not a lot because vitamin C is a water-soluble vitamin, so it's not really stored that much in...
It won't get anywhere near the 45 milligram mark, though.
It won't. I don't know why.
So my understanding is it is something to do with the amount of carbohydrates, like something along, if you have a higher carbohydrate diet, it seems like you need more vitamin C is the kind of thing that a lot of people talk about. Or maybe to get scurvy, you've just got to go pretty low. Like the difference between 45 milligrams and scurvy is quite significant.
I guess.
It's a very hard rabbit hole because it's kind of like the people in the carnivore crew, they're not exactly the most reliable source of information as well.
No, I do know that's the thing, and I do know they say there are some trace amounts in the foods they're eating in meat and like liver, I think, and things like that that are more likely to be consumed on the carnivore diet as opposed to the regular diet.
Yeah, that addresses it.
But I didn't know about carbohydrate increasing.
Yeah, it's something I've seen a lot of people in that crowd kind of.
There you go.
Even that's an interesting one though, because as we spoke about in the last one, protein can be converted to glucose. So it's not like you've got no glucose coming in, like you're still getting glucose.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so going back to what might be a more optimal amount of intake for vitamin C, we touched on RDI being 45 milligrams. The upper limit, which is set, along with the RDI, as in upper limit's kind of like how much would be the most that is recommended to take, or a safe amount. Now the upper limit in Australia is set to 1,000 milligrams per day. Keeping in mind the RDI is 45 milligrams per day. That's already a big gap between upper limit
times.
and RDI. Now, if we look at what vitamin C supplementation or intake does to those plasma levels, we touched on it before. Plasma levels, as in how much is sitting in your blood, is somewhere between 70 to 85 millimoles. Now, 200 milligrams of vitamin C is going to take your plasma levels up to 90 millimoles. So 1.25 grams, as in a little bit more than the upper limit of intake, will take your plasma levels from 90 up to 180 millimoles. So that's a twofold increase, but you have to take more than twofold the amount of vitamin C. Taking 3 grams of vitamin C orally will take your plasma levels up to 220 millimole. And that's about the highest we see your blood levels of vitamin C get to from oral supplementation. Now that's 66 times the RDI. That's a huge increase in what is recommended to take daily, and still a magnitude of 3 times the upper limit of intake. But that's where we see a lot of the research show benefit in vitamin C supplementation, is that these higher intakes and the intakes above the upper limit. So, the supplementation and how much you're getting through diet is a completely different thing. I'd say that's important to consider when we look at the research, because a lot of the research, as I mentioned earlier, shows mixed benefits. So that could come from how much did they use in the research? Did they use what would be the safe upper limit? Because we see benefits far beyond that. When we go above the upper limit, it could be, did you only use X amount as opposed to a huge amount? There's various things that go along with vitamin C timing, as we talked about earlier. You return to baseline levels after 24 hours. That means at 12 hours, you've got half the amount. So some studies will dose multiple times per day. Some will dose every 4 hours. So there is so much mixed methodology in the way these studies are done that probably is why you see such mixed results in whether it's effective or not.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, because I know you take high dose vitamin C, do you take it multiple times per day for this reason?
I do, especially when I'm sick. If I feel like I've got a cold or a flu coming on, I'm doing 3 grams every 4 hours.
Yeah.
And I know that's maintaining my absolute maximal plasma concentration of vitamin C. And anecdotally for me, it's fine. It works great. Like I tend to be pretty resilient. I supplement vitamin C daily, but I rarely get sick. When I do, I absolutely stack vitamin C in there.
Yeah.
I figure if I'm going to increase my plasma levels of vitamin C and I'm trying to fight off an illness or a sickness, I'm going to increase it to the maximal level.
Yeah.
I don't tend to go to half measures, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's really
not something I always not something I really ever recommend to my clients in terms of that amount, but personally I find it works well for me.
Yeah, for sure. Really pushing the threshold there. And I guess that begs the question, if you're comfortable doing that, any thoughts on why the upper limit would be set at 1 gram?
Yeah, I think what you see is like potential GI upset and things like that. So you do see potential like diarrhea, those sorts of things if you do a very high dose, supposedly. I've never experienced it. But like I say, I'm going from when I get sick and I dose a high amount, I'm going from like a normal daily dose anyway. If you were to not have any in the diet and you've got a very low level and you're not used to consuming it and all of a sudden you dump 3 grams in there, you may have an issue, but realistically, I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
And again, it says in those upper limits, if you have a look on, the government websites and that sort of thing, it says it's not possible to establish an upper limit for vitamin C, but 1,000 milligrams per day is a prudent limit.
Yeah.
That doesn't really mean anything. There's no research showing like, don't take more than that. It's dangerous to take more. So I think it just comes from the GI upset potentially.
For sure. So the next 2 things that I want to talk through is sport and exercise and maybe even cancer. Out of those 2, which would you prefer to start off with?
Maybe just cancer, because we'll just talk briefly on it. I haven't gone heaps far down that rabbit hole. But the research in cancer is largely done at an extremely high dose, much more than you can achieve orally. So orally, like I mentioned, the maximum amount you can take is about 3 grams. Any more than that doesn't do anything in terms of further increasing your plasma levels. There is cases out there where people have been given 40 grams through intravenous vitamin C.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's a huge amount. So we're talking about 3 grams being 66 times the RDI.
Yeah.
There's 40 gram doses being pumped into people intravenously. I believe mechanistically, when vitamin C is reduced, or when it donates its hydroxyl groups, it has a structure somewhat similar to glucose, and it starts to interrupt glucose uptake into cancer cells. The cancer cells need obviously the glucose to replicate and survive, and I believe it has some sort of, or that's a proposed mechanism with it helping it with the management of cancer and chemotherapy and things like that, as well as those sort of anti-inflammatory roles that vitamin C has. So I think that's the mechanism. Do you have much more to add to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, one caveat that I'm going to give onto this is that it is a very mixed area in the actual research in terms of outcomes and stuff like that. Even like I was looking at stuff before that, like obviously like I've looked at this for years as well. It's an interesting topic, but like I haven't gone super deep down the rabbit hole because most people seem to be at one extreme or the other. Like there's a lot of people at one extreme who's like quite literally vitamin C, very significant thing that's really going to help with cancer management in high doses, IV, all these kind of things. At the other end of the spectrum, there is also smart people who are like, no, we think vitamin C is actually detrimental to cancer. There are people who are saying lines like, it seems to protect all the cells in the body from chemotherapy, including cancer cells, which therefore means chemotherapy suddenly becomes less effective and so on and so forth. And you have to go on for longer, etc., to get the same results. And like, maybe the answer's in the middle. Maybe there's a bit of both being true or whatever. I just want to add that caveat being like, I'm not out here telling people
vitamin C is going to cure your cancer.
Yeah. Basically. Like, I think if you're going through that process, you want to have people around you who you definitely trust, who it is their job to know the answer to that question, basically.
For sure. And they and us, we just like to look at the research a little bit and talk through some of these things. Out of professional curiosity.
Yeah, because that is mostly what it is for me. Like, I haven't had a cancer patient in, I don't even know how long it's been. It's been a long time since I've had one, so I haven't had to go deep down that rabbit hole. But it is an interesting thing, and I think it's something that should be on people's radar and be aware of for sure.
And yeah, that mechanism of, taking it intravenously is like so next level. And I do like the idea of, like, I don't know, the science behind that's kind of cool. It's like, how much nutrients can we pump into the body, and is it going to do anything?
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't mind taking things to extremes. I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and like I think people need to be looking at those areas as well. Very Joe Rogan-esque as well. That's like, pretty sure when he got COVID, he did IV vitamin C, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Rogan will be that.
Yeah. So in terms of exercise, like I'm going to put some background on this before we go deeper in this. So basically, up until about 2 or 3 years ago, in the evidence-based lifting community, there's a big thing where everyone was like, don't take high-dose vitamin C around the time of lifting because it's going to blunt your hypertrophy adaptations. And the logic basically came from thinking it through in terms of when we lift, we're doing muscle damage and we're causing some inflammation and all of these things that we often think of as negatives. But arguably, that's part of what stimulates the adaptation, which then leads to muscle growth. That is what prompts your body to try and recover and grow stronger. And the argument was, if we blunt some of these things, it blunts the adaptation. And a lot of people were then also looking at the information or the studies that had been done on endurance athletes, and it seemed to be like it was leaning in favor of if you have high-dose antioxidants around the time of endurance training, you get less sore because there's less oxidative damage, but their adaptations didn't seem to be as strong. In the lifting world, because Eric Trexler, did a systematic review on this topic and meta-analysis, and came to the conclusion that there's like almost no research on lifters on this. And like his stance after doing a systematic review is it doesn't seem to matter. But his other stance was, he's like, I just don't see much benefit in it either. So it's like, if you want to be cautious, have it separate from that. But like, there's a few things to cover in that, because it's like, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, one, because as you said, how long it's in the system for, is there some dosing protocols if you were concerned about that? But then two, should you be concerned about it at all? And if you're not concerned about it, we do know it seems to decrease late onset muscle soreness, which is an advantage as well.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a really good, really cool path to walk down, and I like this one. So, it's as Aidan mentioned. Yeah, as you mentioned, you do produce some of these reactive oxygen species, or these inflammatory compounds, when you exercise. Now, the body uses those for signaling. It's almost like, hey, we've done this to the body. This is a signaling thing that tells the body, address this, get better at it, or improve, so that next time we do this, we can handle it better. So I think a lot of the research in endurance athletes shows like a potentially reduced VO2 max, or at least a less of an increase or an improvement in VO2 max with training. So it can potentially blunt some of those, those mitochondrial adaptations you do to be able to produce energy through oxidative metabolism and things like that. So I guess what I'm getting at there is it might potentially reduce some of those training benefits. From my understanding of the research, it was from high-dose antioxidants, not just vitamin C.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
There was vitamin E, I believe, used in conjunction with vitamin C.
Yeah.
So I don't think the research is as strong if it's just vitamin C.
Yeah.
So that's one consideration. The other thing, like you mentioned, is it does reduce DOMS, so that might be worth it. Like, if you can find a good balance between reducing DOMS, training more, you're potentially going to get some other training adaptations outside of just VO2 max. When we look at lifters, who cares about VO2 max for lifters?
Yeah, take that out of the picture.
Yeah, we don't need cardio. So I don't personally see it as being a problem, but it is something worth thinking about in terms of timing. So why take the risk? Why would you take it just before exercise if it is potentially going to blunt your, your adaptations to those? So let's take it in the morning if we're training in the afternoon. If we're training in the evening, take it, I don't know, a couple of hours later before bed, or something along those lines. So apart from that, though, there is one good reason to take it just before training, and that's to promote collagen synthesis if we are using a collagen loading protocol. So, you got to weigh all these benefits. It's like, one, do I want to reduce DOMS? Cool, that could be worthwhile to me. Like, two, do I care about VO2 max, or if that's affected, which is mainly what the research shows it, affecting. Not really for us, so might not really be a concern. And then I guess the third one is, do we want to try and prioritize things like your tendon and ligament repair through a collagen priming protocol? Because if we do, we know that we need to time collagen and vitamin C appropriately, and that's within a pretty close time frame of when you're going out to exercise.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and that's also my stance on it. Like, take the collagen stuff out of it to start off with. If I have a lifter who wants to take it, I'll usually just put it separately in the day, like a separate thing, not close to their time of lifting. Obviously, as you mentioned, if they have a high dose and it's in their system for 24 hours or whatever, they'll still have some in their system, but it is a bit of damage mitigation if there is any at all. This is going to sound real bro sciencey, but like, there's a lot of high level bodybuilders who have high dose vitamin C around the time of lifting and they still make gains. So it's like, it's not a powerful effect. Like, if it is a real effect, it's probably not a big deal. And then based on that kind of stance of like, maybe it's a concern, maybe it's not, but even if it is, it's not a big deal. That's where I come in with the collagen, where it's like, well, if I've got conviction about this whole collagen thing, where like taking collagen pre-workout alongside vitamin C and then having that help with collagen in our body, for example, tendons, ligaments, etc. If that is a thing that is going to work, the effect of that is going to be relatively significant versus the potential small detrimental effect of this. So it's kind of like it outweighs that, basically.
Sure, magnitude of effect.
Yeah, 100%.
And then we look at, as we did touch on it just before, but 50% reduced incidence of like cold and flu for, athletes or exercising population. So that's potentially, worth taking it for as well. Like, what's going to be, more meaningful? Will you get a very small, if any, reduced, training adaptation from any one training session, or are you going to get sick for a week, and what kind of training adaptation effects is that going to have?
Yeah.
So I think that's worth taking into consideration as well. Personally, I'm a big believer in it. I'll take it every day.
Yeah. The last thing I want to wrap on is like the whole criticism that a lot of people have of vitamin C. They talk about being a water-soluble vitamin. When you have too much, you just pee it out. What is like, you've touched on this, and if people read between the lines, they'll kind of like understand already. But you talked about the whole increasing plasma levels as the vitamin C increases, right?
Yeah. So I hate this argument, like, you're taking multivitamins, all you're doing is making expensive urine. I think that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how a lot of nutrients are used by the body, how many roles that they do have in the body, and how uptake of those nutrients works. So vitamin C, for example, there are transporters in your small intestine which transport the vitamin C from your intestinal cavities into your bloodstream across the other side of that barrier. They can become saturated. You can basically max those out, so you can't kind of get any more vitamin C in any faster. So that's kind of like it's almost like an exponential curve of how much you will absorb based on how much is in there. So if you take a small amount of vitamin C, like we saw, 200 milligrams is going to take your plasma levels up to somewhere around 90. To get double that, you need to take 6 times the amount of vitamin C. So that means you're proportionally not absorbing nearly as much as you were at the smaller dose. To then get a maximal plasma of 220, it's only an extra 40 millimole, but you have to take nearly 3 times the amount again to get that last 40 millimole in there. So yes, you are peeing more out. You aren't absorbing that all, but you're still not reaching the maximal amount that you can take up. So if you do want to reach those maximal amounts, you got to supplement, and sure, you're going to pee some out. But that's the only way you can get up to those higher amounts. The analogy I like to give that's kind of fits, but like if you think about protein, when we take in a high amount of protein, we do increase the amount of nitrogen we pee out, which is from metabolizing the protein. You never hear anyone saying, all you're doing by eating more protein is making expensive pee. No, we increase protein above the RDI because we have a specific kind of goal that we want with that protein. We want to build muscle tissue. We want to recover from training. In the same way that I like to think about taking vitamins, like we're increasing them with a specific reason behind increasing them, and that's to optimize performance. Let's take more and not just get by on the minimum. That's kind of my perspective on it. It's just like a pet hate of mine when people are like, all you're doing is creating expensive urine. It's like, okay, well, I don't think you understand quite how this works.
Yeah, it's just a bit of nuance. Like, there's a lot of black and white thinkers out there, but like, it can be both. It can be diminishing returns.
Yes.
Without being, no, this is the line, and once you get once you go above the RDI, there's no additional benefit. Like, it can be both. Like, there can be diminishing returns,
Yeah.
but you still get additional benefit.
For sure. It's like, okay, I'm taking my millimolar concentration of my blood from 180 to 220. What's that last 40 giving me that the first 180 didn't? Is it worth taking 66 times the RDI vitamin C? Might not be for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not a blanket recommendation by any means that everybody needs to max out their vitamin and mineral uptake. But yeah, I do think there is nuances to that.
For sure. Well, we'll wrap things up there. This has been episode 29 of the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed this deep dive on vitamin C, and hopefully some of you found it interesting.